In chapter 8, we read, quote, "See that you all follow the bishop, even as Jesus Christ does the Father, and the presbytery as you would the apostles, and reverence the deacons as being the institution of God. Let no man do anything connected with the church without the bishop. Let that be deemed a proper Eucharist, which is administered either by the bishop or by the one whom he has entrusted it. Wherever the bishop shall appear, there let the multitude of the people also be. Even as wherever Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church. It is not lawful without the bishop either to baptize or to celebrate a love feast, but whatsoever he shall approve of, that is also pleasing to God, so that everything that is done may be secure and valid." Notice the similarities between St. Ignatius and St. Clement's understanding of apostles' authority as Christ's representatives. And much like St. Clement's divine chain of command, this authority is transferred to the bishops, the apostles' successors, as well as the priests and the deacons, quote, "being the institution of God." The practice of the sacramental life of the church is also explicitly tied to the bishop, much like how St. Clement referenced specific priestly roles within the Old Covenant and said that in the same way there are specific priestly roles within the New Covenant. St. Ignatius continues this theme by saying, quote, "Let no man do anything connected with the church without the bishop. Let that be deemed a proper Eucharist, which is administered either by the bishop or by one whom he has entrusted it." And notice how he ties the bishop's presence and authority to Christ's. Quote, "Wherever the bishop shall appear, there let the multitude of the people also be. Even as wherever Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church." Antioch was the first place where the believers were called Christians, and it's also the first place the church was called the Catholic Church. Katholikos is a Greek word meaning universal or according to the whole, signifying the unity which Christ prayed for and the church strived toward. The modern-day concept of competing denominations is a later development, especially after the major schisms in the church, like the Great Schism, conventionally dated to 1054 AD, when the East and West, or Orthodox and Catholic churches, split, as well as the Protestant Reformation beginning in 1517 AD, when the Reformers split from the Catholic Church and splintered into their own individual communions. Since these schisms, the term Catholic has taken on new meanings, but in the earliest Christian sources, Catholic meant universal, as in the one church spread throughout the world. In many Protestant circles today, Catholic is often redefined to mean an invisible spiritual body of all true believers, even if they're separated into thousands of mutually disagreeing churches. Check out episode 17 for more in this regard. So when St. Ignatius says, "there is the Catholic Church," he means the one true church. According to St. Ignatius, it's a fairly simple test to determine whether you are in the true church or not. The Catholic Church is found where the bishop is. Therefore, any church without a legitimate bishop who can trace their authority back to the apostles and Christ himself is not a part of the Catholic Church that Ignatius is describing. Quote, "It is not lawful without the bishop either to baptize or to celebrate a love feast, but whatsoever he shall approve of, that is also pleasing to God, so that everything that is done may be secure and valid." St. Ignatius leaves no room for playing church without the approval of the bishop. It's not lawful to baptize nor celebrate communal feasts. And notice the next line, quote, "Whatsoever he shall approve of is pleasing to God." Much like we've seen in Matthew 16 and 18 with the binding and loosing authority or power given to the disciples, so now the bishops approve or disapprove with divine concordance. And the reason for this high premium on legitimate leadership and legitimate practice is, quote, "so that everything that is done may be secure and valid." Much like how in the Old Covenant there were laws and leaders instituted so that the sacrifices may be acceptable, so also in the New Covenant there are laws and leaders instituted so that the offerings may be acceptable to God. In chapter 9 we read, quote, "Moreover, it is in accordance with reason that we should return to soberness of conduct, and while yet we have opportunity, exercise repentance towards God. It is well to reverence both God and the bishop. He who honors the bishop has been honored by God. He who does anything without the knowledge of the bishop does, in reality, serve the devil. Let all things then abound to you through grace, for you are worthy. You have refreshed me in all things, and Jesus Christ shall refresh you. You have loved me when absent as well as when present. May God recompense you. For whose sake, while you endure all things, you shall attain unto him." Notice the second line, quote, "It is well to reverence both God and the bishop." St. Ignatius doesn't treat the two as contradictory, but rather as complementary. Furthermore, you cannot honor God while dishonoring the representative he appointed. He frames honoring the bishop as a form of worshipful obedience to God, and to attempt to circumvent the bishops appointed by God to lead the flock is to serve the devil. Submission to the bishop's authority is submission to God's will. Denial of the bishop's authority is a denial of God's will. And it's plain to see why St. Ignatius thought this way. As the disciple of John, the writer who gave us the high priestly prayer recorded in John 17, where Christ prays that we may be one as a testimony to the world, he was intimately aware that unity is reliant upon proper structure. And since Christ had willed both the unity of the church and the leadership structure by which this was to be attained, to seek the one is to seek the other. whereas the devil seeks to divide, masquerading as an angel of light. 1 Corinthians 11, verse 14. St. Ignatius is clear. Any act, no matter how good or biblical it seems, that is done outside the visible unity of the bishop's oversight is a contribution to the devil's work of fragmenting the body. Now we come to St. Ignatius's letter to the Trallians. In chapter 2, we read, quote, "For, since you are subject to the bishop as to Jesus Christ, you appear to me to live not after the manner of men, but according to Jesus Christ, who died for us, in order, by believing in his death, you may escape from death. It is therefore necessary that, as you indeed do, so without the bishop you should do nothing, but should also be subject to the presbytery, as to the apostle of Jesus Christ, who is our hope, in whom, if we live, we shall at last be found. It is fitting also that the deacons, as being the ministers of the mysteries of Jesus Christ, should in every respect be pleasing to all. For they are not ministers of meat and drink, but servants of the church of God. They are bound, therefore, to avoid all grounds of accusation against them, as they would do fire." Notice the first line. He says that since they are subject to the bishop as to Jesus Christ, they are not living after the manner of men, but according to Christ. Once again, we see that the honor and submission given to the bishops is not only not in conflict with the honor and submission owed to God, but rather the two are seen to be hand in hand and thereby inseparable. Submission to the three-tiered leadership, bishops, priests, and deacons, is once again mentioned just as in the letter to the Smyrnians. He once again says that without the bishop we should do nothing. This time he mentions the presbytery by name as well and says we are to be subject to them, quote, "as to the apostle of Jesus Christ." So while the priests are under the bishop, they are by no means an irrelevant role in regards to the respect due to them as leaders. He also mentions the deacons, saying they are not merely servers of meat and drink, but servants of the church of God. St. Ignatius presents a church that is impossible to reconcile with modern individualism. He doesn't see the bishop, the priest, or the deacon as merely optional offices and authorities for a healthy church, but rather he sees them as the very things that make the difference between living a Christian life and a life, quote, "after the manner of men." In chapter 3, we read, quote, "In like manner, let all reverence the deacons as an appointment of Jesus Christ, and the bishop as Jesus Christ, who is the Son of the Father, and the presbyters as the Sanhedrin of God and assembly of the apostles. Apart from these, there is no church. Concerning all this, I am persuaded that you are of the same opinion, for I have received the manifestation of your love and still have it with me, in your bishop, whose very appearance is highly instructive, and his meekness of itself a power, whom I imagine even the ungodly must reverence, seeing they are also pleased that I do not spare myself. But shall I, when permitted to write on this point, reach such a height of self-esteem that though being a condemned man, I should issue commands to you as if I were an apostle?" Once again, St. Ignatius leaves no room for ambiguity. If you don't have a validly ordained bishop, you don't have a legitimate church. And notice the next line, quote, "Concerning all this, I am persuaded that you are of the same opinion." He treats this as common knowledge of which he is merely reiterating. He does not treat this like he's raising the bar, so to speak, and this matters quite a bit for our understanding of what the true church is to look like. If within 10 years of the death of the last apostle, the church already had a broad understanding and consensus as to the bishops' and priests' role as Christ's earthly representatives and the physical marks of the church, such that, quote, "apart from these, there is no church," this differs markedly from later formulations of the marks of the church, such as the Reformation-era reductionistic criteria of, quote, "where the word is preached and the sacraments administered." St. Ignatius draws a different line, tying the validity of the sacraments to the visible leadership appointed by Christ through the apostles. According to St. Ignatius, a student of the Apostle John, if a so-called church lacks the legitimate offices of bishop, priest, and deacon, then it is simply not a church in the apostolic sense of the word. In chapter 7, we read, quote, "Be on your guard, therefore, against such persons, and this will be the case with you if you are not puffed up and continue in intimate union with Jesus Christ our God, and the bishop, and the enactments of the apostles. He that is within the altar is pure, but he that is without is not pure. That is, he who does anything apart from the bishop and presbytery and deacons, such a man is not pure in his conscience." The first line is in reference to chapter 6, where he issues a warning against partaking of the mixed wine of heresy, with an exhortation to avoid such poisons mixed with Christ, a mixture intended to be palatable to the ignorant who indulge in this false teaching leading to their death. Notice the second line, where he gives the antidote against the poison of heresy. Quote, "Continue in intimate union with Jesus Christ our God, and the bishop, and the enactments of the apostles." He treats intimacy with Christ, to the bishop, and the enactments or traditions of the apostles as being in tandem. Quote, "He that is within the altar is pure, but he that is without is not pure." Remember, both St. Clement and St. Ignatius hold the Eucharist as the epicenter of the church. The altar where the Eucharist is offered is seen as encompassing the walls of purity. To be outside the altar is to be outside the realm of purity. He further clarifies, quote, That is, he who does anything apart from the bishop and presbytery and deacons, such a man is not pure in his conscience. Much like his letter to the Smyrnians, the theme is clear. Without the bishop, there is no true church. According to St. Ignatius, the church is not a mere philosophy you agree with. It is a place you inhabit. To be outside the altar, that is, to act apart from the bishop, is to be in a state of spiritual impurity.